Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar with the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. So we do continue to see high pressure dominate the rest of this week, but we are going to see a little shift in the wind direction with it coming in more off the continent. Now it's not going to change the upper air temperatures all too much, but at the surface we are likely to see much colder conditions through the weekend. Daytime temperatures 3 or 4 degrees and overnight frost for much of England and Wales, and it's due to seeing a temperature inversion at the surface. We've seen the temperature inversion much of this week across mainland Europe, but because we've been in a bit more of a west to southwesterly flow across the UK, it has been very restricted and we haven't seen as significant of a temperature inversion. But with that wind shift, it will allow that colder, drier air to move in, and we will see that temperature inversion for a few days over the weekend. So although we're not going to see a major change in overall conditions, no snow, no winteriness, it will turn quite substantially colder through the weekend. And yeah, mornings could be very cold once again. As we head into the longer range, as we have been banging on about in the past few videos, we are looking at quite a major change as we head into the last week to 10 days of January. Of course, we had a bit of a battle between westerly and easterly flows. And of course, across the last 3 or 4 days, each day we've kind of had lots of dominant features that have tried to show up. Some runs showing very stormy conditions with a massive Atlantic flow, others showing a Scandinavian high trying to unleash the beast from the east. And today we're kind of in between once again. We've not got any major runs showing a massive easterly flow, but we still have that pressure build to our north and our northeast, which will encourage colder air to move our way, or at least block out the Atlantic more. The GFS has definitely looked like now it's forgetting that easterly flow and is going full westerly winds with big low pressure systems, very deep systems with potentially severe storms arriving. So it is a very difficult forecast at this stage, as we could be looking at hugely contrasting conditions from models only at the sort of 10-day time frame, which I know is in the realm of uncertainty, but normally we have the rough pattern kind of decided. Yes, we normally know if it's going to come in from the north or the west or the east, but it's kind of what tilt, what air masses are involved. But in this scenario, we have no idea if the wind's coming in from the west, the northwest, or even the east. And that means that at the moment, we've got some massive conflicting signals continuing into next week. So do remember, if you enjoyed the videos, which do like and subscribe. And remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now, see, once again on the live radar, it is a dry day. Recording this earlier in the day, around lunchtime, so we're at the peak of the day now in terms of temperatures, but it's not a particularly warm day. It is milder than average, but that's really because of that westerly flow that we are still continuing to see under this higher pressure system. Fortunately, though, as I said, it is very dry, and temperatures are in and around average. You can see, though, where we have got some fog across parts of the Midlands. We saw a warning there last night. Temperatures hovering around freezing or maybe just above freezing. So you can see how isolated conditions are keeping it cold in places, but most are seeing yellow, so temperatures up towards the high single digits. So for most, it's a fairly mild day, but there's this slither here across the Midlands up into Yorkshire where it is still very cold because of those fog patches that are yet to lift. You can see across much of Europe there is some yellows around, but again, lots more widespread fog, and of course temperatures, especially inland, are still pretty cold, as we are seeing an temperature inversion continuing to take place. It's more pronounced over the evenings, but you can still see it is much colder here across mainland Europe than it is across the UK, and that's where we're going to get our air through this weekend, and that's why it's going to turn quite a bit colder. Now, if you look at the latest UKV, not too much going on the precipitation front. You can see over the coming days, bits and bobs of rain trying to push in from the west, but not really having too much success, mainly skirting western Scotland or Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, not really making too much inroads. Early next week, there's a risk of more widespread showers, but again, it's really a minor risk, and again, just a few of these showers coming in from western Scotland and Northern England, maybe in and around the Irish Sea, but really nothing too much there. As we head into early next week, To look at the upper air temperatures, generally very mild over the coming days, but you can see as we head into the weekend, there's a slight cool down coming, and that's because we see those upper air temperatures start to cool down significantly as that wind flow comes in off the near continent. As I said, it's not a massively cold air mass, hardly getting down to -1 or -2, but it's much chillier, and it will mean temperatures through the weekend into early next week will cool down as that airflow comes in off the near off the near continent. Dew points is kind of the big indicator. You can see pretty mild dew points in most places, but still quite cold there across the north where we've seen those frosts. But generally dew points are above freezing a majority of the time. But you can see they do become more widely close towards freezing, persistently below freezing there. Not due to any fog or anything like that, but just generally much colder. And that's a real indication of a continental flow. Look at the max temperatures. You can see this afternoon where we got those fog patches, only low single digits, if not a bit colder than that. Elsewhere, though, mid to high single digits. Into Friday morning, an isolated frost, but nothing too major. And into the afternoon, cooling down a little bit, but widely kind of 5 to 10 degrees, so hovering around average or maybe slightly above average. Into the weekend, though, much colder there into Saturday morning, more of a widespread risk of frost. I wouldn't say widespread frost because most areas are around freezing or slightly above freezing, but the risk here is a lot more widespread. And it's a Saturday afternoon, really quite a cold day, not getting much above 2 to 4 degrees, really quite chilly. And then into Sunday morning, very cold once again, potentially again quite a widespread frost risk. Into Sunday afternoon, still very cold, and even ice days potentially across northern England, where we've got again a bit of fog and trapped cloud and those very cold surface temperatures coming in off the near continent. Can keep it very cold through the weekend, and the same could be said into Monday, where it's slightly milder but still only 4 to 7 degrees, and then another frost into Tuesday. So no massive change coming in the sort of overall synoptics, other than the wind shifting slightly more from a southeasterly than from a southwesterly, and essentially dragging in this colder, drier air off the near continent, and it will mean the frost risk increases substantially into the weekend, and we do see again some very cold daytime temperatures. So it could kind of consolidate a really quite cold month. This, of course, I've had a look at the CET, not shown it in a video, but the CET, it got down to about 2.5 degrees below average for the first 12 days of the month, which is very cold. It's on a slight rise now, as we've had a few milder days, but with these days coming up this weekend, it probably will drop again and probably will be around -2 or so. That's 2 degree anomaly, that is, with the actual CET probably hovering around 2 degrees, which is really quite cold. In sort of historical values, it is cold, but it's significantly it was pretty significant when it comes to sort of recent cold, where we do really struggle to have below average months. So being it close to being 2 degrees below average come the middle of the month, is really quite substantial. And I do think how cold that CET will all be dependent on what happens in the coming weeks. Of course, if we do get an easterly flow, then it could be -3 degrees potentially CET. But if more westerly flow, then it could get back to 0 or -1 anomaly. So do explore that now on the latest longer range runs. We do start on the latest GFS. High pressure continue to be in control, and that wind veers more from a south easterly, as we do see a bit more strain from lower pressure, with the high pressure slowly moving away. We do see a bit of a breakthrough from lower pressure early next week, and that will increase those showers, but it's weak low pressure, not particularly deep. Isobars fairly stretched out, so again, not expecting anything major, just more of a widespread shower risk. This is where high pressure tries to build in, and we do see a very slight easterly flow late next week from the latest GFS. And this is where we kind of see the point of inflection. This is where all the models start to go array, where they all start going on their own kind of path. And the GFS today does show us like easterly, but that high pressure is never allowed to establish because of this big storm system that is around Iceland. And then we go very stormy ourselves into a very unsettled westerly flow, attempting to shift the jet stream further southwards, but it doesn't have much success here, so it'll be oscillating between very mild and very cold sectors. Probably temperatures in and around average for the final week of the month, but that will be sort of a mean. There will be days that are cold, there'll be days that are very mild, very wet and windy mixed in there as well, and potentially, as I said, the risk of named storms. So yeah, GFS showing that high pressure building up towards Scandinavia, but you can see here that high pressure does not remain at Scandinavia. It gets pushed to Eastern Europe, probably turning south and Eastern Europe pretty cold. Look at the temperature deviations and blues going into there instead of those blues getting dragged towards Northern and Western Europe. So we still see that build of high pressure to our northeast, but the jet stream and the stratospheric polar vortex towards Greenland and northern Canada is way too strong and completely overwhelms it. This is not out of the ordinary. We do see this quite regularly when we see these Scandinavian highs trying to build, but the GFS has kind of shown this more through the last sort of 3 or 4 runs, so perhaps the GFS has gone off the scent of that Scandinavian high for now. If you compare it to the GEM, again, high pressure is firmly in control. We do see a brief breakthrough from lower pressure early next week. And again, high pressure trying to build towards Iceland, Greenland and Scandinavia. Again, it has some success, nowhere near as much success as the GFS. And we don't actually ever get an easterly flow in at all, not even for a few hours. So already, come day 6, early next week, we've already got a bit of a difference between the GFS and the GM. And that already doesn't bode well for those longer term prospects in terms of us actually having some confidence in them. Beyond this, high pressure continues to try and build to our northeast, and low pressure continues to try and come off the Atlantic. And if we go back a couple of frames, you'd think here, right at this moment, late next week, we're on for Atlantic onslaught, huge area of stratospheric polar vortex between Canada and Greenland, lots of low pressure systems spawning on this dip in the jet stream, and you'd think we're going exceptionally stormy. However, go to day 10, high pressure is building in from the south, and it's going to build over the top of us, probably frosty, foggy, an inversion taking place. That is complete contrast to what the GFS is showing. So again, just shows you that although yes, GM not showing that easterly flow anymore, and the GM didn't really show it too much in the first place, it was more the GFS and the ECMWF showing it, already at day 10 or even day 6, huge discrepancies between these main models. And that's why we have very low confidence in that longer term. So I do think an easterly flow, Scandinavian high, is still an option. But I think it's one of like 5 or 6 options now that we do have. And we could see mixing of those options or even something in between. So we're going to have to really wait and see how this does play out. But it is looking like it's going to be one of these scenarios where there's kind of one point or like a day where the massive uncertainty is sitting. It's probably to do with the evolution of these low pressure systems early next week and how the high builds in. It'll be that transition that is giving the models headache. If we do go back kind of to this point here, it's this transition. How does this big low move out to northeast Canada, and how does the pressure build to our north? That will decide what we see. And until we've got confidence in this forecast in 5 or 6 days time, then we won't have any confidence in that longer range. Because as I said, the difference between the GFS and the GM was at this point. The GFS had high pressure building in with a slight easterly flow. GM didn't. And that's concluded in a very different day 10 outcome. If you compare to the ECMWF this morning, you can see again, low pressure pushing in briefly in off the Atlantic. We do again see a slight easterly flow there around day 6, day 7, but more of a southeasterly. And that high pressure is there, and it actually stays towards Scandinavia and Greenland, but it's not strong enough to prevent this Atlantic onslaught. Now we'd think we're going to go exceptionally stormy, and the jet stream tries to push these lows in, but it doesn't actually have that much success. And the reason for that is this block to our north is pushing the jet away from its usual transition where it pushes all its momentum west to east. And actually what we see is a massively southerly tracked jet stream, low pressure system spawning over the top of the UK, and still an exceptionally stormy pattern. But it would be much colder, lots more cold air getting pushed into this. Probably not cold enough for snow for the UK, with a lot of influence from the North Atlantic sea surface temperatures coming into this, which is sort of draining any of the cold out of the air. But what it does do is push the jet stream massively far south. So we would generally be cold, or cool at least, and we'd see the brunt of all of these storm systems. So you see 3 different scenarios here from the GFS, GM and ECMWF. ECMWF more similar in overall outcomes to the GFS in terms of being very stormy, but it does it in a completely different way, with this big block still remaining towards Greenland and Scandinavia, just not strong enough at this stage to push in an easterly flow and instead just shifts that jet stream a few hundred miles further southwards and puts us right in the brunt of the storm track with all of these big storm systems. So it would be a very disruptive final week there of January. Now, if you finish by looking at the ensembles, as we've just alluded to, the runs are all over the place. The ensembles are not going to give us a particularly clear picture. Now, you can see from the latest GFS, we dip back towards average, and then we kind of hover around average for the next couple of weeks. Some colder runs, some milder runs, and the number of colder and milder runs has shifted massively between runs. They're always there. Some runs, there's 5 or 10. Others, like this one, there's only a sort of handful. So yeah, really uncertain. That's kind of the best word to use. And I know I've used that word quite a lot this month, as we have had a lot of fine margins when we come to snow events or low pressure systems. And I think those sort of fine margin events are going to continue in the coming weeks from the looks of these latest ensemble runs. The 2 metre temperatures are a little bit all over the place, but generally don't look mild, but not an overwhelming signal for massively cold. Again, a few runs down towards those low single digits, but nothing too crazy. A big indicator is dew points. Look at this, a huge array in dew points in only a week's time. Some up towards 10 degrees, others down to below freezing. So that would be a continental flow, an easterly wind or northerly wind. Those ones that are 10 degrees would be a southwesterly flow. And the same sort of discrepancies can be seen further on. Sea level pressure as well is all over the place. Some runs exceptionally low pressure, other runs exceptionally high pressure. So again, this just reaffirms what we're saying. We don't know what the overall synoptic pattern will be. As I said, normally we have some idea of what it will roughly be. Sometimes, we're trying to distinguish between how cold the air mass will be, how strong will the northerly wind or easterly wind or westerly wind, how strong will it be, or how big the high pressure system is. In this moment, we don't know whether high pressure or low pressure will be in control. We don't know where either will be sat. We really are pretty blindsided at the moment for next week. As I said, it's that day 5, day 6 time frame where I think all that uncertainty sits with that evolution out in the North Atlantic. And that's why we've got some really high pressure dominated runs probably producing easterly winds, and we've got some other very low pressure dominated runs producing massive storm systems. And if you compare finally to the ECMWF, unfortunately it's broadly very similar. Not too much differences here. Moderate to high precipitation longer term, generally ensembles around average or slightly above average with lots and lots of deviations. So yeah, it's going to be one to keep a very close eye on. Hopefully though, as I said, I think that point where the uncertainty is coming from is going to happen early next week. So hopefully the next couple of days we should have a lot more confidence in that evolution. We should start to see runs agreeing a little bit more, and then we'll be able to have a much, much better idea on what we're going to be in store for later next week and generally the final period in January. But at the moment, all options are still on the table. Perhaps a slightly lower confidence in that easterly flow just because it's not really increased at all and the operational runs are now shying away from it a little bit. But yeah, I think we'll have to really keep an eye on it. And at the moment, it is going to be a really difficult forecast for the rest of January. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you again for another video soon.